In yesterday's reading from the Epistle of James, the writer leveled a blistering charge at the wealthy members of the church, those who used their position as members to take unfair advantage of their workers, especially those workers who were also members of the church. Now the writer, in effect, turns to face the rest of the congregation, the majority who are poor and vulnerable, and offers them words of consolation and hope. Taken together, this is a sort of on the one hand, on the other hand approach. Let's see what he says to those who have been quietly suffering at the hands of their fellow members. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, November 18th, 2022. In today's environment, people who are being cheated by their bosses either cry out in protest or they file lawsuits to seek to make things right. And they should. But the Roman Empire in the first century worked differently, very differently. There were not protections for workers. No OSHA to make sure workers worked in safe conditions. No EEOC to make sure workers weren't treated differently based on irrelevant factors. None of the protections we have come to expect and take for granted, and which, by the way, generations of Christians fought hard for. No, in the time when the Epistle of James was written, workers were pretty much subject to the whims of employers. As I pointed out yesterday, ironically in the church, wealthy members could and did take advantage of other members of the church in employment, knowing that because they were fellow members of the body of Christ, they were not likely to protest loudly. That's what James addressed in the passage we read yesterday. In today's passage, he gives advice to those workers seeking redress of their grievances. But instead of urging them to go on strike or to man the barricades, he offers a surprisingly soft approach. Here's what he says. Be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also must be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the doors. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Indeed, we call blessed those who showed endurance. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Well, as blistering as James's condemnation of the wealthier members was, this is a surprisingly, some might even say disappointingly, mild bit of advice to those members who were being taken advantage of by other members. Be patient. Do not grumble. Do not judge. Endure. What's that about? Well, boils down to this. It's a matter of trust. In yesterday's reading, part of the writer's blistering attack on the folks who were taking advantage of the poorer members was the warning that they would suffer God's judgment. So now his advice to those same poorer members is a question of trusting that God's judgment will indeed come. So, if one believes that God is truly the judge, that God's judgment is imminent, and that God can be trusted to carry out God's judgment, there's really nothing else one needs to do. Trust God and be patient. The part of me that yearns for a more just and equitable world, a world in which the poor are not taken advantage of by the wealthy and the powerful, bridles just a little bit at this. But here's the deal. There was every expectation in that community that God's judgment was imminent. The expectation in the Christian church was that Jesus would return, and very soon. It followed that one could be patient, knowing that wrongs would be righted. So, is there a takeaway for us in all of this? Does this mean we should never cry out for justice for the poor? Does it mean we should be passive in the face of injustice, whether we are the victims of injustice or advocates for others? No, of course not. But it does mean that whatever justice we can seek out now is always only partial and incomplete. It is only an approximation of the justice that will come when God's kingdom is finally complete. For now, even our best efforts are only a dim reflection of God's ultimate reality. Tomorrow, where is our comfort in life? But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.